So our next presenter is Matt Brooks, and for those who've been in county government for a while, you may recognize Matt. Matt was the executive director of the Association of Indiana Counties, we think through '96 through 2004, and he actually hired me at the AIC. I was on the House staff, and he hired me as the legislative director in 1999, and then when he left in late 2004 is when I became executive director. But Matt's really a great person, kind of a Renaissance man almost. He's a yoga instructor, I've noticed now. So not only is he president and CEO of the County Community Mental Health Center Association, but he does a lot of things in the community. And really, I can just tell you, he's very passionate about the mental health issues. And in 2015, his organization, thanks to his efforts, won a national award for all the focus that they brought to Indiana on mental health issues. And he's conducted several meetings that I attend, as well as FSSA, Department of Corrections, and some of the people who provide mental health services. And so really he's a great asset to his organization, and I think a great asset to Indiana. So please welcome Matt Brooks.
Thank you, David. So great to see so many familiar faces. I mean, we're going back 15 years that I was running the Association of Indiana Counties, and some of the things we're going to talk about today involve some negotiation that I did when I was on the other side of the negotiation. And here we are today dealing with these important issues. And I really appreciate you, David. And boy, I got to tell you, David, of all my hires, and I've hired a lot of people through the years, is right at the top in terms of my best hires, if not the best. Probably is the best, I'm sure. He really does a great job for you guys, and you should be honored to have such a hard-working policy person working for you in the state of Indiana, and he really has proven himself to be that. David is exactly on point about what is happening now in our society in terms of where we are with the mental health and substance use crisis facing the state of Indiana and the nation. I also serve on my national board of directors for our national association. And I can tell you, I just got back from Washington last week, and these issues are really at the core of our communities. And they are breaking apart our communities. And I can assure you, if I look around this room, that every single person in this room has been impacted by addiction in one way or another. Every single person. And these are issues that have come to the forefront. These aren't issues that face parts of society that we didn't maybe focus on as much as we used to. These are focused on our family members. These are focused on our friends. These are focused on our people in our workplace. So I want to give you a little bit of summary about the county role in funding for community mental health centers and what that is, and how that is used to support the services we're providing right now throughout the state to ensure that we have an effective mental health and substance use treatment system to be able to respond to this crisis. And I appreciate David also having Kevin Moore with you coming today from the Division of Mental Health and Addiction. He does a great job in terms of trying to push forward this public policy around our mental health and substance use. But these are controversial issues, and I know from my experience with all of you in the past that county government is very challenged. You're challenged because of the way that our funding system works, the pressures placed on you to be able to respond to the societal challenges you have at the community level, more and more administrative rules placed upon you, both from the federal and state perspective, and then ultimately you're needing to be able to respond to that at a time when your ability to generate those dollars has been limited by property tax caps. And property tax caps are going to play into some of our discussion today. So as I say, you guys play an important role in our funding of our system. And we probably haven't done a good enough job in the past ensuring that we're communicating about how this all works. Because there has been some controversy about the mental health funding that you provide the community mental health centers in your community. And we did think, and David and I, as we were talking through this, it's important to make sure that you fully understand how these dollars are used in support and what some of the restrictions are associated with them because of the way we have very uniquely financed our mental health and substance use system in the state of Indiana. We do have a provision that was negotiated back near the end of my time at the AIC, and I'll get to that in a second. But 1229.22 does indicate that county government shall fund community mental health centers, and those dollars through you are provided through an allocation that is determined through statute. And in fiscal year 16, we were getting about $37 million from county governments in aggregate, and that represents about 7% of our total funding. And you may say, well, 7% doesn't sound like that much. But when I explain how those dollars are used, it'll help you better understand why those dollars are so incredibly valuable in terms of our system. Now, in 1229.22, what makes this unique and why there's challenges and sometimes some disagreement about the use of these dollars is that the dollars that we get from this are based on not a tax levy. So we're not like the library, or we're not like your local bus system or others where there is a tax rate associated with the property tax. When we negotiated 1229.22, and I say we because I was on the other side when we did this, what happened was before I get into that, just a little bit about how it works. So those dollars go through and come out of the county commissioner's budget. They're not in a formula that's driven by a tax rate levy. And there is another provision in 1229.21.2 that does allow for some additional dollars if you so choose as a county to contribute more dollars to the community mental health center system. And you can do that through that statute. And in fact, we have had a couple counties through the years that have utilized that statute to provide additional services because of the understanding of the importance of the services that we provide. So what we have found is that we have not been bound by the property tax levy limits that have historically been associated with these dollars. And in fact, in 6.1.118.510, not only are CMHCs not bound by levies limits, but also developmental disability providers are not bound by those levy limits. And that, in my mind, and I believe in the legislator's mind because they passed this legislation, is an indication that when it comes to the seriously mentally ill, when it comes to those with developmental disabilities, we don't believe that they should be bound by the same level because of the unique nature of the challenges facing this difficult population. And that has been in statute now for quite some time. So before this happened, back before 2004, you may remember, I know some of you in the room definitely remember, when we changed the way that we assess property and went to 100% market value. That changed a lot of stuff because before I believe it was like a 1/3 value, and then there was these other calculations that were added on to come up with the amount. But there was a lot of statutorily established receivers of those dollars who, in fact, when we went to 100% market value, if we were at 1/3, we suddenly got a win. The community mental health centers got a windfall of dollars in the year 2004. And I remember both Dave and I saying, wait a minute, this isn't right. How come now they're getting all this money? And what happened was they did not appropriately, when the legislation was drafted back in that time, they didn't account for some of those levy organizations that were going to receive now 100% versus 1/3 because of the ratio that was used and applied to the amount that they were to receive. So there was a windfall of monies that suddenly was due to the community mental health centers, and it was well beyond what was the standard in the past and what they had received. And so we worked on and decided that we had to figure out a way to resolve this challenge. And so at the time, we utilized a base year of 2004 as whatever you got in that year, and then future funding for community mental health centers would be based on the assessed value growth quotient, as that was the basis for county government funding growth changes as well through that calculation, which actually should be coming out about any day now. And so that was sort of the way that we worked through with my predecessor the negotiation about how much community mental health centers were going to receive from the counties based upon this, using that 1229.22 provision in order to make this happen. And that became effective in 2004. And so that kind of went along pretty well for a time. Always some concerns that had been generated and raised about why are you getting more money? Well, of course, the argument that I would always make is that our needs and the mental health needs and the substance use needs of our communities continue to increase. So the more that we're able to utilize those dollars in a way that helps to treat those individuals in your community and keeps them out of your county jails and keeps them out of the county hospital, helps to reduce your overall costs. And sometimes those things are really hard to quantify and they're hard to visualize, and especially you in the council and fiscal bodies, you look at the dollars and that's totally understandable. That's your charge. And we sometimes look at those intangible values that are harder to determine, but certainly have a value in terms of keeping the costs down at the local level. But when the circuit breaker protection was developed, that created some challenges, because then you guys then were suddenly faced with, how are we going to respond to the 1%, 2%, and 3%? And how are we, state government, going to have to be able to respond as local government to this challenge, because we're getting less money and we've got to pay out to these taxing units, and we know that that created an enormous amount of pressure on you. I know that my taxes in Marion County went up substantially in that first year before the circuit breaker, and then when the circuit breaker kicked in, it lowered my property taxes, but the burden for you to respond didn't go away. You still had all those costs, and so they had to, and David did an excellent job, as well as some others, figuring out a way to create a process by which you wouldn't be as bound by the impact of those, so that you could reduce that levy amount across those taxing units by the amount that you were impacted by the property tax change. And that certainly happened. We at that time were trying to figure out, because as I mentioned earlier, the dollars coming from the county commissioner's budget and not from a taxing levy, we weren't under the statute of the circuit breaker, because if you look at the circuit breaker statute, it in fact talks about the taxing levy units. So we did have the attorneys, our attorneys at Krieg DeVault at the time, develop a legal opinion that says that CMHCs were not bound by the taxing levy limit. And understandably, this was a hard thing for you all to appreciate, because why would the CMHCs get more money when we're having to reduce that levy across all others? And of course, we're saying, wow, we really need those increased dollars, as we negotiated back in 2004, because our demands in the community are increasing as our mental health and substance use issues are increasing. And so that really created a tough dynamic between us, and in some cases a little bit adversarial. And as you all know, it's a case with my mental health centers. There's 25 that provide services in all 92 counties. So all 92 counties have to statutorily have a CMHC provider in your community as your primary CMHC. Now, you may have other CMHCs doing services in your county, but you always have one, and that one has to provide the wide range of services that is required. We call it the continuum of care, to ensure that all of those services are met in that county, so that we're not missing out on making sure that anybody who walks in that door has access to services. And that's tough, because even in our environment, and you guys are facing the same thing we are, we have a huge turnover rate. We've got a lot of challenges around retaining individuals because of our salary levels and the challenges around the licensure requirements for us to provide these services versus what we're able to pay them. So it really creates a difficult and challenging environment. And so, and through that process, there was some effort to make us subject to that, to those circuit breaker, and there was a proposal that had been put forth through the legislature, and it got to a committee. And I have to admit to you, I'll be full transparency, I fought against it, and it did get defeated in the Ways and Means Committee. And yet we still have had some communities say, wow, we really believe you should be subject to that. And so we've had this kind of ongoing challenge to resolve that. And I get both sides of this issue, and I can certainly appreciate your perspective and the challenge around that. But I did want to tell you a little bit about how the money is used, and that might help appreciate the value. If I mentioned that 7% of our total, why that is so important. And the reason that is so important is we really rely on the Medicaid program to fund what we do. In fact, about 85% of our community mental health center system is funded by the Medicaid system. And that Medicaid system, as you probably know, from at least just if the news, if nothing else, is that there is a local and state matching obligation to your dollars that you spend. Historically, that has been a 2/3, 1/3. So under traditional Medicaid, state and local governments, eligible intergovernmental transfers, we call it, account for 1/3 of the total Medicaid cost, and then the federal government picks up 2/3 of the federal Medicaid cost. You might know under the Affordable Care Act, that's why this is, even the current dialogue that's happening at the federal level is so important, is because states were incentivized to expand Medicaid, and Indiana being one of them, as we did through the HIP 2.0 program under the waiver program, was one of those states. And the reason that became more incentivizing for states is that they created 100% federal reimbursement and then slowly tiered it down to 90%, maintaining itself at 90%. And now you might have heard in the news from the Senate bill and even previously in the House bill, the idea is to phase that enhancement out at that 90-10 split. The Senate bill being until 2021, giving them a little bit more time, but creating a larger reduction in that amount. But that was the incentivizing factor for states to say, let's pursue this, let's go after this, because we have a lot of uninsured people. We have a lot of people who are using the emergency room who don't have a payer source associated with them. We have a lot of people who are homeless and don't have access to health care, and they end up, they're basically being taken care of in two places, either the county jail or the county hospital emergency room. And I got to tell you, both of those options are not very good. They are expensive, they're costly, and they really don't help move that, especially in the area of addictions, move that person into recovery, which we believe, and I hope you believe this too, or at least start to realize that this is an important dynamic, and that is that addiction is a health disorder. And we have treated it historically as a criminal behavior. But so many people who are impacted by addiction, in fact, the vast majority of people now with an opioid dependency started with a legal prescription. Often because a primary care doctor didn't have a lot of training in behavioral health and starts over-prescribing medications, and then suddenly you don't have access to those anymore. And it's really created a difficult dynamic. And that's why you've seen at the state level a lot of legislation, even as recently as this recent session, putting limits on how much you can prescribe for these opioids. Now for a new patient, for example, it's going to be a 7-day supply. The idea being we can't just keep throwing prescriptions, and then when the prescription runs out and somebody says, I need it, once you get that addiction, you're going to do what it takes to keep yourself going. And often that means I'm going to steal from my family, I'm going to act inappropriately, I'm going to do those things that cost, all those things start to have a serious cost to our society and drive our overall cost factors. So those things become so important, and the reason why your dollars are so important is that for every dollar you give us, you give the community mental health center system, we're able to provide $3 in Medicaid services. So those dollars actually are leveraged to create more services than had you just given county-only monies. Or if you use state-only dollars for healthcare services, you're not able to tap into that leveraged scenario by where your monies extend further and you're able to do more with those limited dollars. And this has created a difficult situation because sometimes the county jail may say, well, why aren't we using those county dollars that we're giving the community mental health center system for in-jail treatment? And I think that's an incredibly legitimate question. Here is what I believe is the accurate answer. The federal government does not allow incarcerated individuals to get one-on-one therapy if you are incarcerated and utilize the Medicaid program. The only exception to that is something that we fortunately worked on, and this was something that was near to me with the bill that I worked on, 1269 from 2 years ago. We changed from a terminated state if you were incarcerated to a suspended state if you're incarcerated, meaning that if you get incarcerated, your Medicaid status isn't terminated, it's simply suspended during the period with which you are incarcerated. But what it allowed us to do, and this is important, and I think we still have 12 counties that have not taken advantage of this, and really, really think that you should think about this. This is something David and I worked on 15 years ago, and finally we have it passed, and we still have some counties that haven't taken advantage of this, and that is if you have incarcerated individuals and they are in jail, you can get Medicaid reimbursement for inpatient stay. So if they have an acute care cardiac arrest situation or other type of acute health care situation and they have to be hospitalized, you can now bill Medicaid for those services as long as you sign an agreement with FSSA to undertake those services. And we've been working hard. There's a gentleman named Ray Evers at OMPP, Medicaid office, who works on that. And I would implore you, this doesn't help me at all because we're not able to provide therapy services in jails. Medicaid doesn't allow it. It does allow for this inpatient stay stuff, however. So I'm just throwing that out to you. Think about that and try and take advantage of that because it's only going to take you one serious, catastrophic patient, maybe somebody who suddenly needs dialysis. And if you're not able to leverage Medicaid, that could really cost you a lot of money, and it doesn't cost you anything to sign this contract. So just think about that when you're moving forward with that. And I have a list if anybody wants. I can get it. Actually, I sent it to David last Friday. So actually earlier this week. So he's got that information. So there's a few of you still out there. So these dollars become so important for us to maintain our overall system through that matching operation that it has really changed the dynamics. And then with the Healthy Indiana Plan, what's made it so wonderful, and by gosh, I hope we're able to keep this program, because now individuals who are coming out of the criminal justice system have access to Medicaid, have access to mental health and substance use treatment. They didn't have that before. Before the Healthy Indiana Plan came along, if you had a substance use disorder and you were and you did not have a mental health disorder, but just simply a drug problem, you didn't get Medicaid to cover it. And so we didn't have a payer source. There was no access to treatment for these individuals. And so a lot of people, especially those coming out of the criminal justice system, and I know that you know what happened when 1006 passed a few years ago, which put additional pressures on local communities because the level D felons, level 6 felons, are no longer going to the DOC. They're coming back to your local communities. They have to be treated. Do we want to just keep them in the local community and have them no access to treatment? No. They need access to mental health and substance use treatment in order to keep them from recurring recidivism, going back to jail, going to jail to get their health care, going to jail because they stole it from their family member to get their drugs. This is tough stuff. And we need, and I'll give credit, I tell you, Senator Kennelly and others, Representative Sturwald for Hendricks County, have done an absolutely wonderful job realizing the dynamics here. And they created the Recovery Works program. I'm sure Kevin will talk about that in a little bit. That allows us now to use state dollars as a stopgap measure to get people into treatment more effectively. And we're up to, we got $30 million in the last budget, we got an extra $10 million in this budget, up to $40 million in this budget. And the whole rationale behind that Recovery Works program was to give you communities an opportunity to get folks into treatment, because what's the alternative? They're just going to keep coming back into community corrections, and then you're going to have that recycle. This was an idea of Senator Kennelly and Representative Sturwald to say, let's get these folks some treatment so that we can get them into recovery and make them gainfully employed. That's the goal. Get them back into society. And recovery works. You can recover from a substance use disorder. It's not a lifelong disability. You can recover, but it's a tough thing. And I have to fight with the Prosecutors Association all the time because they, have a tendency to believe that that the incarceration is a good option for them. But and it's tough because mental health addiction is not like a lot of other. When you have a broken arm and you get a cast put on, that arm gets healed and it's better, typically. With addiction, let's say that before we had the Recovery Works program, an individual went and used drugs 2 weeks after that they supposedly were clean. Well, maybe with Recovery Works now, that individual used again, but they used 3 months later. Well, in our world, the mental health world, that's improvement. But in the criminal justice world, often you used again, by gosh, you're going back. You're guilty. And so we're really having a challenge with our world sort of colliding in terms of what is the best approach. Accepting and appreciating an improvement, but knowing that addiction takes a time to unravel itself and that it's always there. Versus sort of a cut and dry approach of guilty, back to jail. And I don't believe that that's the best approach. Now, certainly the drug dealers and others who are seriously involved in the community, but also a lot of times even in individuals who are selling small amounts of drugs are drug users themselves who do that to get free drugs just so they can get their free drugs, and then they get caught and then they get incarcerated. And so we really need to think about that in terms of what does that mean to get treatment, and what is that recovery, and how does that look? But we have had additional pressure because of the HIT 2.0 placed on our system. So at a time when you guys are feeling your pressure financially, we're feeling the financial pressure as well to deliver more services on limited rates with a limited amount of licensed and professional staff to carry out these services. And that's a challenge for us. Our number one public policy issue facing the community mental health center system is our workforce. Do we have enough licensed professional staff to meet the demand? I was meeting with Senator Young's staff the other day talking about the federal bill, and they said, well, what would it take, Matt, to fix this system? I said, you can give me $200 million tomorrow, and I would not be able to spend that money for the next 5 to 8 years because we just don't have enough licensed staff to carry out the services. So we need a coordinated approach. This isn't just throw money at the problem approach. We need a coordinated approach to fix all of this stuff. Now, I want to just kind of give you back to that thing about the primary care area. I want to make sure that why it's so important that we have a designated community mental health center in your community. And I know some of you here have multiple community mental health centers that are operating there, but you always have one that is officially the designated center, and those are the ones that receive the county dollars. So only your designated center gets the county monies, not other centers who may or may not be providing specific services in your community. A few years ago, they changed the rules that allowed, it used to be in the old days, you had to only operate out of your county, or the counties that you served. And now you can operate in other counties, but you always have to have that one. And so that bill that was filed this last session would have changed that, and the bill ultimately didn't even get a hearing. But I just want to kind of frame it for you a little bit. And what it would have done is eliminated that geographic area and allow the county commissioners to figure out who they want to pay. And it also would have changed the funding formula. And one reason why the funding formula is total county population, we have to serve every individual who presents themselves for services in our community. If you come into our center, you have to be provided services. Now, it may take a few weeks, and I know we're guilty of that, and I apologize, and I'll always work with you. If you have a problem like that, let me know. But it takes some time to get them in, but we'll get them in. And we have to get them in because that's one of our continuum requirements. And there's a reason why we believe that bill was not good. We always have that safety net provider that provides that broad array of services. So that's the center that has to provide all those services, not just one that comes into your community and maybe provides kids-only services, for example. We use those dollars to leverage the federal Medicaid program, and the importance that I've already referenced that and why that's so important. Your dollars mean a lot to us. So that 40, 35, $37 million essentially is $100 million in services. That's why that's so important. We also, you know, if we're going to invest in the community, if we're going to, and we are, in some of the counties, we're one of the largest employers. Believe it or not, we're one of the largest employers in some counties. And if we're going to invest in that county and we're going to build new facilities in that county, we have to know that there is a long-term commitment to that relationship, because why would we continue to invest if every year the county commissioners can say, well, we're going to switch, we're going to change, we're going to put somebody else in there. So that gives us a problem. And then also those dollars impact our federal grant program. So we use those monies in terms of our overall grant program. So in my editorial here, fortunately, I said, the legislation was never acted upon, and the current statutes currently remain. Now, let me just check. How much time did I have, David? 45 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Oh, 11? Okay. I'll speed it up here just a little. Now, all is not terrible. I'm not just up here to say that, you know, we're going to keep it going the way it is, because we acknowledge that circuit breaker issue. We do. And we realize that even if nothing else, from a perception standpoint, it's not very good. Because what happens to you guys is, if you give us a little bit more money and you have to reduce others, that means our piece of the pie, if you think about your county funding as a pie chart, our piece of pie increases a little bit, and other circuit breaker levy taxing units have to decrease a little bit while we're increasing. And we realize that that is a perception issue and it's a challenge, even though ultimately I do believe those additional dollars certainly have value for your community. That's, again, hard to sometimes fully quantify or appreciate. So we know that this has been a challenge, and David and myself and my board of directors have been meeting, and we've had some very positive meetings to talk about this challenge, and realizing that, you know, you guys have some financial pressures, we have financial pressures. We're supposed to get a little bit more money every year. Well, whatever the statewide assessed value growth quotient is, but I think it's averaging about 2%, probably 2 to 3 per year. And so we realized that we wanted to seek a compromise and figure out, is there a way, as we move into the 2018 legislative session, that we can work with you, county government, to say we acknowledge that maybe it isn't necessarily fair that that circuit breaker issue gives us more money when others have to do a reduction. So David agreed, and we had this conversation. And David went back and looked at and utilized policy analytics to do an analysis of what is the difference between what is the statewide average growth quotient increase that you receive and what is the amount that you have to net decrease based upon those circuit breakers, and what is the difference between those two numbers in terms of coming up with this. So they did policy analytics, did an analysis, and went through and looked at over a period of time what that impact is, and what those losses are, and what the net decrease is for you as the result of the AVGQ. And they did an analysis between 2012 and 2016, and used some information from the DLGF to come up with the calculation. And as you'll see here, in total, county general fund levies increased at an annual rate of 2.71% between 12 and 16, while the net levy increased at a rate of 2.19, so a difference of 0.35% annually. And now there is a variation by counties. In some there is no impact, in others there's a very dramatic impact. So if you look at that chart, I don't know if you've ever shared that with the group, Dave, but it's really a fascinating document to look at kind of what that impact has been on circuit breakers and nets against all of those. So I gave a few examples of counties that have different impacts by that. So, and that was between a 4-year period of analysis, and there was, it was done with 90 of the 92. There were a couple, Lake County, as you know, there's some issues there, and then back when this was done from the year, there were some challenges in LaPorte County that I understand now have been resolved, but there were some issues there with some taxing problems there. And so we went through and said, how can we work through this? How can we figure out a balance? And so what we have essentially come up with is possibly, and David and I will work on this, we haven't, 2018 session, we're going to start working on it here over the next few months, is to, using this type of analysis, say the amount that you owe the Community Mental Health Center will be reduced by that impact of the circuit breaker. So we would apply the circuit breaker levy limit impact on you so that we are sharing the exact same reduction across all, and that way we're not out there getting more money when others are getting less. Our growth rate equals your growth rate, and we ultimately work collaboratively to continue this process of ensuring these dollars are so appropriately spent on really one of the most pressing issues facing our society today, mental health and substance use treatment. So I hope today, giving you a little bit of the history of how things came to be and why they are, why this crisis that we have is so critical, and how your county dollars play into that crisis in such an important way, to the tune of about $100 million, even though you're putting in only $30-some million, and we're able to do $100 million, why that becomes important. The pressures we've had for increased demand for services, because we have more people eligible now for services, we're able to provide more services to the criminal justice population, and we're moving in a direction of good public policy around our approach to mental health and substance use treatment, and a big part of that is the assistance we get from county government. So I really appreciate those dollars and what you do for us, and I appreciate all you do, and I appreciate the challenges you're faced with from this difficult fiscal environment that really transcends all levels of government and all levels of service delivery systems. So that's it for me. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes, Steve Jacobs.
Hi Matt, how are you?
I'm good. How you been? Good to see you.
Hey Matt, you mentioned earlier that a lot of the opioid addiction starts at prescription drugs. Do you have hard data on that?
I can get you some. There is certainly out there. The number's high too. It is, I want to say like 72%, something like that, start with prescription. Oh, the question was, do you have any hard data on the fact that the majority of addiction for opioids starts with legal prescriptions? Starts with legal prescriptions.
It's just an issue when you get into fighting this account. I'd like to.
Yeah, I'll get you some. There's some really strong data that shows, and in fact, we used some of that data with the legislature when they came up to that 7-day limitation, and Senator Jim Merritt has really done a yeoman's effort addressing these challenges, and that was some of the information we used to help support that. So thank you for the question, Steve. And yes, sir.
First of all, I'd like to compliment you because your services are something that are essential to our county. My issues, though, revolve around the lack of communication between the local groups and county government, and basically that's the lack of communication. We don't hear from you, or you report to the commissioners who may or may not ever report to us. So if we're going to continue this system, we need to have that communication. And then, secondly, by what standards are you operating? And if you're not providing the services to the county should have an easier way to change that service provider.
I'll answer both of those. The communication issue is dead on. I would completely agree with you. We have, oh, sorry, you guys. The question was, we need to improve communication between our systems. And I think I even referenced that at the start of the presentation. We haven't done a very good job. There is some statutory requirements for us to send an annual report and provide information about how those dollars are being used. Some of my center directors have done a better job than others, I'll be the first to admit, getting out to the counties. I have continually stressed this point with my membership. We had a discussion on this very topic at our most recent quarterly meeting. We meet four times a year, and stressed that very good point. Thank you for the second question. The second question was about changing that designated center. The the administratively established rules for changing to a new center are on the books, and there is a process to do that. It's not an easy process. I would contend it shouldn't be an easy process for all those reasons. You remember I delineated about investment in the community, providing that broad array of services. There is certainly a process. In fact, Kevin Moore, who's here with us, is going to speak after me, is responsible for the administration of that process. And it has been used successfully in the past to change who your designated provider is. If you have any ideas for a process to make that easier, I'd be happy to look at it. I will always err on the side of it shouldn't be an easy change because we need to ensure continuity of services. If you change that provider, what happens to the services and the employees that were providing services to that person? When you're dealing with somebody's mind and you're simply changing, all of a sudden your therapist has to just change on a whim, that's not good for your recovery and your therapy. So we believe that a slow and consistent change is certainly appropriate, but it needs to go through an administrative process.
Right. The way things are right now is it's either or. That we can't, if you're not providing the services to the county, you can't withhold 10% of the money or do anything to enforce any kind of a change. You just keep operating the same old way that you always have.
Well, if any of my centers aren't, or you need me to wrap up? Basically, if it's just the same old thing and they're not providing the services, but I would contend they should be. We have a continuum of care we have to provide. If all of those, and they're delineated in statute, if we're not providing all of those services, please let me know because we have an obligation to do so. So if now the way that they get the services may be tough and maybe it isn't as robust as we would like, but they need to be there. So I would certainly investigate if that's the case, and I know Kevin would too. Yes, sir.
Piggyback on that, it isn't that we don't get any response to know what services are being provided. We might get financial to the commissioners, to the council. We don't hear anything. Is there some kind of way that you can give us a performance report that would show what our county services are based against the state law, the requirements there? At least it would open the eyes of financial.
Sure. Yeah. What county are you guys from? DeKalb. Now, they should be providing that document. It's actually required in statute. We're supposed to provide an annual report to the county that delineates services. So if that's not being done, I can check and see.
It might be done, but it's only the commissioners.
Gotcha. Yes, it does say the council.
They
Yes.
may not ever get it.
Okay. Then Dave and I will work on that.
Let's do one more question, and then again, this subject matter is going to stay with us for a few minutes here as Kevin from FSSA comes up. But let's do one last question here. I'm going to talk to Bob. I think he had his hand up first. Bob Lechner.
Thanks, David. And one of my main motivations in coming today was listening to you and David and I have spoken. One of my main motivations in coming to this meeting today was you and David and I have spoken about this issue in the past. I know other members have as well, and I just want to say that you have very succinctly and articulately provided the best explanation of both funding and services that I have ever heard. So I really want to commend you for coming here knowing that there were going to be some questions about that. Do you think, you answered everything I had, including funding, accessibility, communication, but do you think that community mental health centers should be accountable to the county council and to the extent that they should appear at a budget hearing and address this? And again, if we're receiving the annual reports, I've never seen them, but we'll address that locally as well.
Well, there certainly should be accountability, and there's a reason why those statutes are on the books. You know, it does say that they need to go to the council, and I think they're being misdirected, and it could be too that we're sending it to the county auditor and they're just not getting directed properly, because that's typically our point of contact for distribution of documentation. And it could just be that those are not being directed right. So David and I, we've actually talked about this communication problem, and we're going to focus on working on that. And since we're going to open up the statute to talk about the language, that gives us an opportunity to clean up that communication piece. And I will make a commitment to work with you to improve that. And I'm putting a lot of pressure on my members to do a better job of that, so that we can avoid these challenges. You know, if they did, and I told them to their face, if you do a better job communicating, we won't have a lot of these issues and the uncertainties where you don't know what's happening or how the dollars are being utilized or why they're so important. So thank you for the question. Okay, thank you all.